All right, guys. So previously, we were looking at this question, talking about nicotine, heart disease, and how this all links in with the negative consequences, sorry, of smoking. But hopefully, guys, that question has made a load of sense. Now, guys, we're going to move on to the next question from the IMAT 2013, and this comes in the way of question 20. So it says it has recently been suggested that some degrees can be completed in 2 years instead of the traditional 3 years, but staff teaching engineering and medicine at degree level say that the current first year mostly involves getting students up to a common level of maths and physics, which in the past was achieved by high school teaching. By the end of second year, few students have reached the level of attainment that students did 40 years ago. 2 year degrees are not realistic, certainly not for engineering. Which of the following is an assumption of the argument in the passage above? So, guys, give yourself just over a minute. Be sure to be back after that, and then we can go through the solutions. All right, guys. So welcome back. So let's go through this. So remember, we want to look for the conclusion firstly. So the first sentence, it has recently been suggested that some degrees can be completed in 2 rather than 3. So that's what people are saying in general. But we don't know at this point if the writer agrees or disagrees with this. So this is basically just a fact or an observation. So we can just line this all out. Then it says, but staff teaching engineering at degree say that the current first year mostly involves getting students up to a common level of maths and physics, which in the past was achieved by high school teaching. So this is just observation, given the opinion of the staff teaching these subjects. So we can again line this all out as fact. And then it says by the end of the second year, few students have reached the level of attainment a student did 40 years ago. Again, that's just a fact, isn't it? Quite clearly. So we can just line that out. Then it says 2 year degrees are not realistic, certainly not for engineering. That's clearly his or her opinion, isn't it? So this is going to be the most opinionated sentence. And remember, this is off the passage guide where they give a load of reasoning at the start and then they end with the conclusion. So basically, the conclusion is 2 year degrees are not realistic. And some of the reasons behind this is because the level of attainment is not the same as 40 years ago. And it gives a few other reasons, but those are some of the main ones. So which of the following is an assumption? So let's go through these systematically. 2 year degree courses will have the same amount of teaching per year as 3 year courses. So I think this is actually quite good because him or her is assuming here A would be a correct assumption because it if, for example, the 2 year was more intensive, then you can get more teaching done in the 2 years, such that um, in total you're getting the same amount of total teaching, if that makes sense. So what they're assuming here is that they have the intensity of the courses is the same, so that in 2 years obviously you would learn less and therefore you wouldn't technically have completed the course. So I think A is actually a good choice over here. So we can bracket that off. Then the next one, school examinations are easier now than they were 40 years ago. That, guys, isn't in any way linked to the conclusion, is it? So we can just ignore it. The next one, maths and physics are most important elements of engineering. That maths and physics are more important elements of engineering than they were 40 years ago. Again, doesn't really link to the conclusion, quite irrelevant. So we can just X that out. Engineering students are less motivated um, than they were 40 years ago. Again, it's not really talking about in the passage like student motivation and stuff like that. Remember, when it's out of context, just basically ignore it, guys. So that it can't be that one. Option E, 2 year degree courses will be more popular with students. Would be more popular with students than 3 year courses. So it's not really talking about popularity here, is it? It's more just talking about the skills you acquire throughout the course. Hence why it cannot also be this one. So hopefully you can agree, guys, and understand that A in this case would be the correct answer. So hopefully, guys, that has made sense. And as always, we look forward to seeing you in the next video. All right, guys. So in the previous video, we're looking at this question, talking about 2 year degree courses and how they might not be feasible because of the level of learning essentially in the current age. Hopefully, guys, that has made a lot of sense. But now we're going to move on to the next question, which is question 30 of the same paper. So it says horrific images of the earthquake in Haiti were seen immediately all over the world, and by the next day, the full extent of the damage was seen by the entire world. Here, the main problem was moving aid from the airport to distant areas, and with the roads largely blocked, the only practical method was to use helicopters. The great nations of the world should be ashamed that food was not getting to the people who needed it, and that even a week later, their relief still depended on ability of courageous and skillful drivers to reach them in trucks. Which of the following is an underlying assumption of the argument above? So, guys, pause the video, just give yourself a minute, be sure to be back after that, and then we can go through the solutions. All right, guys, so welcome back. So let's go through this looking for the conclusion then. So it says horrific images of the earthquake in Haiti were seen immediately all over the world, and by the next day, the full extent of the damage was seen by the entire world. That's clearly just fact, isn't it? So we can cross this all out as fact. And then it says clearly the main problem was moving aid from the airport to this, and with the roads largely blocked, the only practical method to use was helicopters. Again, that's more. Some might argue it's an opinion. Some might say okay, there might be other methods, but I'd probably say this is more leaning towards a fact. So you can cross this out as a fact. So block this all out as fact. And it says the great nation of those should be ashamed that the food was not given to the people who needed it, and that even a week later their relief still depended on the ability of courageous and skillful workers to reach them in trucks. So this is quite clearly the conclusion, isn't it, guys? Remember, it has the keyword they should be, or they needed to be, or is very demanding language. So basically, the great nations should be ashamed is basically their conclusion, and that's just adding to the sentence, but doesn't really add to the conclusion. So more or less the conclusion here, guys, is that the great nation should be ashamed, and some of the reasons they're given is, there was a load of damage that was caused, and the only way people could be reached is through helicopters. So we need to find the link, then, isn't it? We need to find therefore the assumption. So A, the relief agents were able to import trucks to Haiti, but not helicopters. So it doesn't really talk about relief agencies here. This is quite irrelevant. So I'm not really going to consider this one. The next one, B, the great nation of the world had helicopters at the disposal which could reach Haiti within a week. So quite clearly, guys, this is going to be it, isn't it? I'm pretty confident. You could probably even stop here, but we'll go through all of them anyway. But B, the reason I think it's B, guys, is because it's saying the great nation should be ashamed of herself, and the reason is because the only way um, the only way things could have got to the deprived areas is through helicopters. So obviously the link there is that you're assuming that these great nations had helicopters to use to allow that task to happen. So this is a really good option. Um, C, there was enough food in Haiti to supply all the people in the weeks after the earthquake. Doesn't really link in with the great nations. Remember, the great nations is basically what our conclusion is based upon, and therefore our assumption should be relevant to that. So I'm not really going to consider this one. The images failed to prompt the great nations of the world into relief operations. So sorry, the images failed to prompt the great nations of the world into relief operations after the earthquake. So yeah, yes, this does address the fact that there's great nations, but it wasn't the fact they shouldn't be ashamed because it wasn't the fact that the images failed to prompt them. It was more of the fact that they potentially had helicopters and they didn't use it, so it can't be this one. And the people in Italy were able to clear their roads within a week of the earthquake. Again, doesn't really tie with the context of the conclusion, therefore it won't be this one. So hopefully, guys, you can appreciate then that here the correct answer is going to be B. So hopefully, guys, that made a load of sense. And as always, we look forward to seeing you in the next video. All right, guys. So in the previous video, we looked at this question talking about the disaster in Haiti and how the great nations basically should be ashamed because of the fact that they couldn't potentially import helicopters that could have saved a load of people. But hopefully, guys, that question was a good example actually of how these assumptions work. But hopefully, guys, many of you were able to get that right or understand why B was the correct option. Now, guys, we're going to move on to the next set of questions, and they come from IMAT 2012. So let's look at these. So question 4. So it says, television programs that show young people in a school environment continue to feature highly in viewing schedules. Few of the programs, however, give an emphasis on the time spent studying and the work required for academic success. Many of the actors used are far older than the characters they portray, so different attitudes, behaviors, and appearances that are inaccurate and sometimes inappropriate. Broadcasters and producers should try to correct this. Which of the following must be assumed in the above argument? So, guys, pause the video, give yourself a minute or so, and be sure to be back after that, where we're going to go through the solutions. All right, guys, so welcome back. So let's go through this, looking for the conclusion, remember, firstly. So television programs that show young people in a school environment continue to feature highly in viewing schedules. That's clearly just a fact, isn't it? So we can line that all out as fact. Few of the programs, however, give an emphasis on the time spent studying and the work required for academic success. You can consider that as an opinion, but as we're going to see, there's a much stronger opinion. So we can just cross this out. Then it says many of the actors used are far older than the characters they produce, and attitudes, behaviors, and appearances that are inaccurate and sometimes inappropriate. So this is just fact, isn't it? It's very unlikely that they'll be lying about that. So we can just line all of this out as the fact. So, and then it says broadcasters and producers should try to correct. Remember, should is our key word here. That's going to be a really strong conclusion indicator. So, um, so yeah, broadcasters and producers should try to correct this. And what they're trying to recorrect, they're trying to recorrect how actors portray school life. And some of the reasons they're given is that actors are a lot older, and they don't represent things basically as accurately as they should be. So let's go through the options. This says young people may feel that their social life is dull compared with that shown in television programs. So yeah, it's not really talking about social life and stuff. It's more talking about how school is. So social life kind of indicates like outside of school. So we're not really interested in that one. There's often impractical use young people in television program given the restrictions on how many hours they can work. So this would actually give a reason for them to use old people in the in the shows they are showing. Um, Therefore, this might even go against what they're trying to say. And either way, it's really kind of doesn't link in any way to the conclusion. So that's why we're not going to include this one. The next one, C, is important to represent school life accurately. Yeah, this is actually really good because I'm going to bracket this off. The reason I think this is really good is because think about it. Remember, formulate it into a sentence. So broadcasters and producers should try to correct this, assuming it is important to represent school life accurately. So the assumption they're saying is that you should correct this because it's really essential that people know how school life looks properly. So remember, guys, when you formulate into sentences, if it makes sense, then that is probably a good option for your conclusion. And the next ones, let's go through the last two options. Television programs about other areas such as police are not accurate. Again, that's completely irrelevant. We're not really talking about other television programs. We're really focused on school television programs. And the next one, schoolwork and academic success are important. Schoolwork and academic success are important to all students. This one, so this one, I guess, it's quite bold. So academic success are important. I mean, it's not hopefully, guys, even if you were to consider this one, you would appreciate that C is a much stronger fits much more strongly than E as the assumption. I try to think of a better reason to explain it, and perhaps some people can put it in the comments if they find any other way of explaining why E might not be a good fit. But hopefully, as most of you can appreciate, then that C is a much better, even if you were to consider E, C would be much better at explaining the assumption of this paragraph. So that's why I'm going to go as C as my final answer. So guys, I really hope that has made sense, and as always, we look forward to seeing you in the next video.